We possess more high-quality, instantly accessible empirical data than any society in human history. Anyone with a smartphone can access decades of peer-reviewed scientific literature in seconds. Yet, on basic realities, from the safety of vaccines to the trajectory of the Earth's climate, we are fractured by tribal loyalty. For decades, institutions assumed this skepticism was a symptom of ignorance. If the public pushes back against a scientific consensus, they must lack the proper facts. This is the knowledge deficit model, the idea that you can cure division by pouring raw data into an empty public vessel. But the data tells a different story. This chart plots scientific literacy and numeracy against political polarization. If the deficit model were true, these lines would converge as people learned more. Instead, the individuals with the highest degrees of technical reasoning capacity are the most politically polarized. It gets stranger. When researchers provide highly numerate partisans with objective, expert-backed facts that contradict their worldview, the lines don't correct toward the center, they hook backward. Providing evidence causes them to double down on their false beliefs. Researchers call this the boomerang effect. High intelligence does not automatically lead to objective truth. Instead, cognitive resources are frequently weaponized to construct sophisticated arguments that defend a person's pre-existing ideology. In a process of motivated reasoning, the goal is protecting social identity and signaling loyalty to a political tribe. When raw facts don't change minds, and often hardens opposition, the standard approach to scientific communication fails. To understand why we still rely on such a flawed system, we have to look at how it was built. In 19th century Europe, science was not a public resource. Scientific inquiry was an exclusive, closed-door pursuit restricted to a wealthy, highly educated male elite. Knowledge was carefully contained within academic societies and esoteric journals. The gatekeeping was literal. A ticket to the 1850 British Association for the Advancement of Science was strictly labeled not transferable. The public was deliberately alienated from the production of knowledge. This isolation began to crack in the mid-19th century. The presentation of science transitioned into spectator events, open theater surgeries, and publicized debates surrounding Darwinian evolution forced scientific discovery out of the laboratory and into the center of public moral discourse. By the mid-20th century, the geopolitical pressures of the Cold War and the space race forced another evolution. Science was heavily funded and broadcast top-down through television and radio. It was a monolithic delivery of institutional consensus designed to align the public with state-funded goals. This broadcast era created a powerful illusion. Because nationalistic goals temporarily suppressed societal divisions, scientific institutions internalized the belief that broadcasting facts from authority figures always generates consensus. They assumed the deficit model worked, missing the structural realities that made it function in the 1960s. That artificial consensus collapsed. The deregulation of the media landscape in the late 1980s, followed by the explosion of the digital age, shattered the mass broadcast model. Citizens self-selected into thousands of personalized, fiercely guarded digital echo chambers. Modern algorithmic media, platforms driven strictly by machine learning recommendations, do not optimize for nuance. They wield opaque power over the informational diet, optimizing for engagement, retention, and outrage. Within these fragmented ecosystems, social identity theory takes over. Complex empirical questions, like the efficacy of a needle exchange program or a novel vaccine, are stripped of their technical details. They mutate into intensely contested markers of tribal loyalty. This is where framing dictates reality. The exact same dataset on climate change will be decoded differently depending on how it is presented. Frame it as environmental degradation, and conservative demographics often reject it. Frame the identical data as a matter of economic opportunity or national security, and reception improves. We are now facing the problem of extension. The boundary between certified expert and layperson has dissolved online. A climatologist with 30 years of peer-reviewed research is placed on the exact same algorithmic footing as a conspiracy theorist recording from their car. Attempting to solve this by sharing raw, unfiltered data is useless. As long as our media ecosystem financially and electorally rewards tribal outrage, individual scientists arguing in comment sections are fighting an unending structural tide. Decades of data show that grassroots solutions consistently fail. Studies evaluating interpartisan dialogue, bringing opposing sides together to find common ground, reveal weak reductions in political animosity. Any minor empathy gained in those sessions typically decays within 14 days. Real behavioral change requires top-down signaling. When researchers exposed citizens to prominent political elites from opposing parties, modeling constructive, bipartisan civility, those citizens became more willing to engage in healthy civic behaviors themselves. Delivering the facts also requires bypassing affective polarization entirely. You must use trusted messengers. A warning about climate risks immediately triggers partisan defense mechanisms if delivered by an opposing politician. That same data is absorbed and considered when delivered by military leadership or private sector experts within the listener's own in-group. We can also build psychological resistance before deception occurs. This is inoculation theory. By preemptively exposing citizens to these specific, flawed logical tactics used by bad faith actors, like false dichotomies or emotional manipulation, we can build cognitive immunity that neutralizes misinformation before it takes root. Fixing science communication requires aggressively altering the environment itself. We have to change the algorithms that reward outrage, deploy to right messengers, and preemptively defend the public, rather than applying a bandage of raw data after the damage is done. The environment is about to become exponentially more volatile. The rapid integration of generative AI and large language models introduces an entirely new threat to the informational landscape. Historically, science misinformation required human intent, motivated reasoning, or deliberate deception by interest groups. Generative AI introduces the AI hallucination, generating plausible but entirely fabricated scientific inaccuracies without any malicious intent, purely as a probabilistic error in word sequence. As public media and search engines rely on AI to curate news, public trust relies on institutional transparency. If journalists continue to frame routine scientific self-correction, like a failed study replication, as evidence that science is in crisis, rather than the scientific method working as intended, they will sever whatever public faith remains. Fortunately, researchers have identified a specific psychological trait that actively counteracts ideologically motivated reasoning. It is distinct from standard intelligence or literacy. It is science curiosity. In robust experimental settings, individuals who possess an intrinsic desire to consume novel information for the pleasure of discovery defy partisan expectations. Their preference for surprising data overrides their drive for tribal identity protection, leading them to eagerly consume information that challenges their political worldview. Cultivating this curiosity requires abandoning dry, top-down lectures. It demands a shift toward interactive, socially embedded environments, places where audiences determine the path of discussion, physically interact with models, and relate abstract phenomena directly to their personal lives. As algorithms and AI fracture our shared reality, the work of science communication has moved beyond the simple delivery of data. Success depends on the scientific community understanding the audience as thoroughly as the research they conduct.